Have you ever imagined that there are creatures that were never part of the divine plan? Throughout history, our imagination has given rise to beings that defy the laws of nature, creatures that were not created by God, but emerge from our minds, our fears, and even scientific advances. They are beings that inhabit ancient tales, science fiction, and even modern urban legends, showing that human beings have always felt the need to invent forms of life, no matter how frightening and incredible they may be. But why did we create these beings? What's behind our need to explore the unknown? In this video, we will delve deeper into the origins of these creatures, unveiling their significance. When we talk about creatures that God did not create, we are talking about beings that defy the natural order. These creatures were not thought of as part of the planet's ecosystem. They emerged from the human mind, born from stories, fears, and even science fiction that make us question the limits between the real and the imaginary. But what is behind this idea of not created by God? Basically, we are talking about human inventions, fruits of creative minds and cultures that sought to give form to what they could not explain. Over the centuries, every civilization has had figures who inhabit the unknown, creatures made from the parts of animals we know, mixed together in impossible ways. These beings represent the fear of what is beyond human understanding, but they also reflect a desire to connect with the supernatural and create new realities. They challenge the notion of what is natural and raise a fundamental question. Where did the human impulse to create monsters come from? Even before the great religions, humans already told stories about mystical beings. In several ancient cultures, narratives about legendary creatures that inhabited the skies, seas, and forests were common. Some cultures believed that these beings were divine, while others saw them as intermediate beings between men and gods. The fact is that these creatures have become fundamental in explaining natural characteristics, fears, and even human behavior. For example, in many cultures there are legends about gods or creatures that inhabit mountains or volcanoes. For these civilizations, these places were sacred and could only be inhabited by special beings. In Japan, there was the Tengu, a being with bird-like features, known for inhabiting mountains. In the forests of South America, there was a legend of Yara, a charming and treacherous figure who attracted men deep into the forest. These figures were a human attempt to give form to the unknown and to understand the inexplicable. They were born from the need to narrate what was invisible, and, in a way, they were created to protect us from what we could not understand. Perhaps one of the most classic examples of creatures invented by man is the figure of the chimera. A chimera is a creature formed by combining parts of different animals, an invention of several ancient cultures. In Greek mythology, the chimera was described as a being with the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and the tail of a serpent. A combination impossible in nature, but fascinating enough to be remembered to this day. What leads a civilization to create these bizarre beings? Chimeras represent a desire to explore the limits of life, asking what happens when the elements of known creatures mix. But this curiosity has a dark side, as it also represents the fear of the unknown, of what is different, and often of what is uncontrollable. The chimera, like other hybrid beings, is a way of expressing our insecurities and confronting fears that we cannot always understand. She personifies chaos, and her power to fascinate lies in the feeling that something impossible has come to life. Among all the creatures that inhabit the popular imagination, dragons are perhaps the most universal. Almost every ancient culture has some version of dragons, either as menacing beings or as guardians of wisdom. But after all, are dragons a figment of human imagination, or do they actually exist? The origin of dragons is full of theories. Some believe they arose from fossils found in ancient civilizations. Imagine the surprise of a human thousands of years ago finding huge bones, proof that something monstrous existed on Earth. The sight of these bones may be inspired by stories about dragons. Another hypothesis is that these beings were inspired by real animals, such as giant crocodiles, which were little understood by cultures far from their habitat. Regardless of origin, The fact is that dragons represent power, mystery, and danger. They embody the fear of what we cannot, but also the desire to possess strength and control over the unknown. These creatures became so popular that, even today, they are part of films, games, and legends. With each era, dragons transform, gaining new traits and meanings, but without ever losing their enigmatic charm. The unicorn is one of the most beloved and mysterious creatures, portrayed as an enchanted being in the shape of a horse, but with a spiral horn in the center of its forehead. This mystical creature dates back thousands of years and is present in cultures around the world, from ancient Mesopotamia to China and medieval Europe. The origin of the unicorn is difficult to trace, but it may have arisen from exaggerated reports of rhinos or antelopes with single horns, seen by adventurers in distant lands and reported as something magical. The fascination with the unicorn also reveals something profound about the human being. It represents purity, retention, and the unattainable. It was believed that only a pure person could approach a unicorn, which showed how this creature symbolized a desire for an ideal of virtue and innocence that, in reality, we rarely encounter. This imaginary being was modified over time, acquiring different symbolisms, from a celestial creature to a symbol of spiritual power. The image of the unicorn is still inspiring, bringing with it a sense of magic and beauty that captivates children and adults alike. The world of the oceans is full of mysteries, and it is not surprising that so many legendary creatures are associated with the sea. Mermaids and sea monsters are some of the most fascinating creations in the human imagination. From ancient Greece to sailors of the age of great navigation, there were reports of half-fish, half-woman beings luring men into the depths, promising love and beauty, but ending in tragedy. Monsters like the Kraken were feared by navigators and described as gigantic creatures capable of destroying entire ships. These beings represent the mystery and danger of unknown waters. By inventing these creatures, human beings projected their fears onto the sea, an uncontrollable environment that hid secrets. It is interesting to note that many of these monstrosities arose from distorted observations. For example, the Kraken may have been inspired by real giant squids, which inhabit the depths of the oceans. However, the idea that the sea could harbor monstrous creatures still stirs the imagination and our fear of the unknown. In addition to the creatures that inhabit nature, there are also those that represent supernatural forces, demons, spirits, and entities that appear in various cultures around the world. They are beings that were not created by the hand of God, and that often symbolize evil, temptation, and the dangers of the spiritual world. Ancient cultures saw these beings as figures who inhabited forests, mountains, and even their own homes, waiting for the opportunity to influence humans and turn them to the dark side. The presence of these beings in the human imagination also represents a warning about what is beyond the visible. Demons, for example, are often described as beings that represent the dark side of the human soul, our fears, desires, and impulses. That's why they are so powerful in the collective imagination, useful as a metaphor for our own internal conflicts and the trials we face. Although not created by God, these supernatural figures play an important role in how we understand good and evil, fear and redemption. With the advancement of science and technology, new possibilities have emerged for creating creatures that challenge the imagination. Science fiction, for example, popularized the idea of acquaintances, beings that inhabit other planets and that have forms and abilities that surpass our understanding. By inventing these beings, humans explore the idea that life can exist in forms that are beyond what we know. Some are described as peaceful and intelligent, while others are seen as threats to humanity. This creation of extraterrestrial beings reflects the human desire to discover new frontiers and connect with the unknown. However, the fear that these beings could pose a threat is also a constant in several stories, revealing our anxieties about the unknown. Aliens, then, symbolize both the fascination with exploration and the fear of what lies beyond our planet. They are a modern example of how we continue to create creatures that, although not part of the divine plan, represent our deepest concerns. Another example of human creations that were not created by God are mutants. In fiction, mutants are beings that have extraordinary abilities due to genetic mutations or that make them different from normal humans. This idea arose from scientific discoveries about genetics and evolution, exploring what would happen if nature itself began to modify species in ways that we cannot predict. In the popular imagination, mutants represent the power of transformation and the idea that living beings are constantly changing. But this view also has a dark side, as genetic mutation is unpredictable and often uncontrollable. Mutants lead us to question the limits of science and nature, challenging the idea of a perfect and ordered creation. Therefore, they have become emblematic figures in science fiction and pop culture, showing what happens when man tries to play with the laws of creation. Among the most popular creatures in modern fiction are zombies and vampires. These figures are fascinating precisely because they challenge the natural order of life and death, and their stories often involve the idea of immortality, or bodies that continue to exist even after death. Zombies, for example, appear as undead, unconscious bodies that roam the world in search of human flesh. Vampires, beings that feed on blood, are known for their immortality and for inhabiting the boundary between the world of the living and the dead. These figures, despite not having been created by God, serve as a metaphor for some of humanity's oldest fears. Zombies represent the fear of loss of control, of the transformation of the human into something bestial and without reason. Vampires symbolize the obsession with youth and the fear of death. In both cases, we have creatures that defy natural logic and force us to think about our mortality and the limits of life. Continuing with more fascinating creatures that were never part of the divine plan, we will explore some iconic figures from the human imagination, which reflect both the desire for transcendence and our deepest fears. Among the most popular creatures in modern fiction are zombies and vampires. These figures are fascinating precisely because they challenge the natural order of life and death, and their stories often involve the idea of immortality, or bodies that continue to exist even after death. Zombies, for example, appear as undead, unconscious bodies that roam the world in search of human flesh. Vampires, beings that feed on blood, are known for their immortality and for inhabiting the boundary between the world of the living and the dead. These figures, despite not having been created by God, serve as a metaphor for some of humanity's oldest fears. Zombies represent the fear of loss of control, of the transformation of the human into something bestial and without reason. Vampires symbolize the obsession with youth and the fear of death. In both cases, we have creatures that defy natural logic and force us to think about our mortality and the limits of life. Cryptozoology is the study of animals that exist, but whose existence has never been proven by science. Cryptozoologists are dedicated to investigating creatures, such as Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, and other legendary figures that, although never officially found, continue to be the subject of reports and sightings in various parts of the world. These researchers believe that, hidden in the most remote corners of the earth, there may be beings that have not yet been cataloged. But why are humans so attracted to the idea of mysterious creatures? The fact that there is no concrete evidence about these animals creates a mystery that fuels the popular imagination. Furthermore, these beings challenge the idea that they already know everything about the planet, showing that there is still much to be explored. The interest in these beings not created by God, but invented or imagined, shows our incessant search for the unknown and our desire to discover something surprising. Among the best-known figures in cryptozoology are Bigfoot and the Yeti. Both are described as giant primate-like creatures, but while Bigfoot would be found in the forests of the United States, the Yeti would inhabit the icy Himalayan mountains. There are many reports from people who claim to have seen these creatures, and some expeditions have already been organized to try to find evidence of their existence, without definitive success. The fascination with these creatures is linked to the desire to find something new and inexplicable, something that challenges science. Furthermore, Bigfoot and the Yeti evoke man's ancient fear of what is hidden in dense forests and remote mountains. They are figures that represent the mystery of wild nature, reminding us that there are still parts of the world that remain unexplored and that hold ancient secrets. Greek mythology is famous for its fantastic creatures, which were seen as powerful and feared beings. Among the best known are the Chimera, the Minotaur, the Hydra, and the Cyclops. These creatures did not exist in the real world, but they were an essential part of the Greek mythological universe. They represented as many forces of nature as they did aspects of the human psyche, and their tales served as lessons and warnings about the dangers of the world. These mythological creatures were symbols of impossible challenges and the constant struggle between good and evil. The Chimera, with its mixture of parts from different animals, was a monstrous symbol of chaos. The Minotaur, trapped in the labyrinth, represented the dark side of humans and the need to dominate their own instincts. The Hydra, which had several heads, was a metaphor for problems that, when faced, seemed to multiply. These creatures, created by the human imagination, reveal the dilemmas and fears that have spanned centuries and that still resonate in our culture. In more recent times, technological inventions originate from new creatures, robotic and synthetic beings which, although they do not have biological life, are created to imitate living beings. These artificial animals appear in science fiction as automatons, beings that, although created by man, often end up gaining their own consciousness or rebelling against their creators. Iconic examples include characters like the android from Blade Runner and Honda's Asimo robot. These technological figures reflect the human desire to become creative and even to imitate the work of God. The creation of robots and artificial intelligence, which appear alive but are not actually organic, challenges the definition of life and raises ethical questions about what it means to create and control intelligent beings. These inventions cannot be divine creatures, but they represent humanity's advancement towards the creation of new forms of existence, which may one day develop their own autonomy. As we explore these creatures, whether they are beings from ancient legends, modern myths, or science fiction inventions, we realize that they all have something in common. They are reflections of our fears, our desires, and our insatiable curiosity. Creatures that God did not create, but that we ourselves created to face the unknown, to explain the inexplicable, and sometimes just to imagine the impossible. These fantastic beings show us that human beings are, above all, storytellers. These stories, full of mysteries and adventures, help us deal with our own limits and expand our understanding of life and the universe. Now, the question remains, do these creatures only exist in our imagination, or can they really inhabit some unknown corner of reality? And you? Do you believe that these beings may have some real basis? Which of these creatures piques your curiosity the most? Leave your opinion in the comments and share with us if there are any other legendary or fantastic beings you would like to see explored in a future video. If you like this content and want more fascinating stories like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Who knows, in the next video, we'll uncover together the secrets of more mystical creatures or mysterious discoveries. Stay tuned, because the mysteries are just beginning